the Almighty, for His grace. It's literally not human. So, the last time I was in avocado, I progressed to finals from OG. So you should get used to this, Yeah, but like I was thinking about the finals, how I want to progress. I think this is why.
So I'm heading the dread. Punish me for being right. I'm heading this dread. Yes.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Sure, the debate isn't whether AI is perfect. I think the question in the debate is that given like the evidence that we have now in the info slide, or like generally, do developed democracy benefit from allowing AI legislative agents along with like human lawmakers? Let's get something clear. We're not replacing parliament, or we're not giving like AI constitutional power, like that executive power. We're just giving them voting seats and legislative participation to AI systems which have been proven effective in a real political environment, like the info slide says that, and that kind of thing. I think the context that we're talking about is a stable democracy with like existing rule of law, things like institutional checks, like things like high capacity systems, things like like there's like accountability and that kind of thing. Our burden is just to prove that AI participation improves governance outcomes without undermining that democratic legitimacy. We'll meet that burden, and we're taking this to finals. I think just a couple of things then we need to understand. This AI will affect, like they'll probably like pass bills on like public policy or things that affect a lot on human life. But we think then, since it's a developed country, there'll be a lot of oversight. Like these companies will have oversight because they have sophisticated tech, so they're able to do this oversight. I think it's dumb for these guys to say, oh, there'll be no oversight. I think that kind of thing. They use and what does this? I think that's important. I think first argument on why AI like fixes systemic failures that humans cannot avoid. I think these guys can't argue that I think these guys can't argue how humans are like imperfect and that kind of thing. I think we say that humans are not just imperfect, they repeatedly break the system that is in predictable ways. I think AI isn't competing with a perfect world, it's competing with a deeply false, like a bad status quo. How does this happen? I think human politics is built on incentives that encourage bad decision making. How does this happen again? I think in every modern democracy, lawmakers face the same pressure. You fucking want re-election, you want approval, you always want like donor money, you want public image and that kind of thing. I think these incentives distort policy before even a bill is drafted. So the harm isn't that politicians sometimes get it wrong. The harm is that politicians are structurally rewarded for choosing what is popular and what's correct. I think AI breaks this now because it has no self-interest, it has no re-election motives, it has things like no donor capture, it has things like no constituency pressure. I think this fundamentally changes like the purpose of legislation. What now happens, it like forces policy making to shift from what helps keep these leaders in power to what policy creates the best long-term outcome. I think like the purpose of legislation changes, and I think we're able to protect minorities who are not able to be. I think I will analyze that. But also secondly, I think AI solves the problems that human beings can't. I think this gridlock, which is always driven by identity and tribalism. Look at how developed work looks like. It's always bipartisan. It's always either leftist or rightist. I think why this is necessarily bad, because these parties block policies, not because they are bad, but because they fear giving the other side a win. So this is why things like bills die in committees. This is why governments fucking have shutdowns. We saw what happened in the US. This is how bipartisan reform collapses. I think this is how all these things are bad. I think humans are wired for tribal loyalty, and it's particularly bad. Why does AI break things? I think AI does not belong to a party. It doesn't get offended. It doesn't seek dominance. And we think then, in votes where human deadlock votes out of identity, AI has best decision making because it's able to vote on evidence. It's able to vote on cost benefit outcomes and long societal value, which what necessarily benefits both people, and we think that that's necessarily bad and good. But anyway, the info slide tells us something what this efficiency gains does, because they told us 30% and 40%. What does a 30% improvement, even if it's 30%, what does this mean? I think it means things like more legislation is reviewed. We think that we have faster crisis responses, we have less legislative backlog, and we think that's a quicker correction of the policy failures that exist in status quo. A 40% drop in corruption like leads to fewer captured votes, more transparent governance, and we think that less money influencing power, and that's particularly important. The second argument is that why does AI produce like better policy than humans and not just faster policy? I think like the comparative here is not the debate versus like human experts. Things I want to say, oh, human have experts and that kind of thing. It's human making value-based like driven decisions versus AI making like driven decisions. So what does this happen? I think humans receive evidence, like AI operates on it. The difference is very massive. Why is this true? I think humans cannot escape cognitive bias. Like it's fucking hardwired on you. Every legislature, no matter how educated you are, you're always influenced by things like confirmation bias. You're always seeking evidence that fits your existing beliefs. Things like status quo bias. Things like availability bias. I think things like your emotional things like tribal. I think these aren't just moral failures. They are biological, and we think that that's particularly bad. But also, secondly, AI can process complex things that humans cannot hold in like their working memory. I think a single policy intersects like economics, things like demographics, things like health, things like tech, and that kind of things. Humans simplify these things because the cognitive load they experience is too high. I think AI is able to solve this because they scale complexity effortlessly. I think it can stimulate hundreds of possible failures. What necessarily means we don't have like policy gridlock. But before I continue, no.
Point.
Yes.
What's the extent of independence the AI system will work under?
I think my frame already answers that. I tell you, these people will just vote, they don't replace the constitution. I think fucking listen. Third thing, on like the idea that AI resist the emotional distortion that makes policy worse. I think some of the worst policies in this democracy comes from the perception of threat, comes from things like you're always being like pushed by media, comes from like tragic events and that kind of thing. So we think then that's why you have like minorities being like not favored and that kind of thing. I think AI won't confuse this thing with like truth because it recognizes patterns and not just antidotes. It recognizes like the long-term benefits, and we think that that's particularly bad because this like protects policy from like swings who can destabilize governance. I think since this thing is very predictable, I think it's able to have that governance that we want. I think also AI makes policy future-proof and human like beings can. I think AI can focus on like population aging, things like labor, things like climate. Human beings cannot do that, and that's why policy in human beings is very short-termistic. I think we win on why AI is able to solve all the harms that happen in like status quo.
We thank the Prime Minister for that kind of speech. Let's get the leader of opposition to open the case. Oh, yeah.
I hope you will hear me because I'm POI is I'm loud. Okay, I start in 3, 2, 1. I think in the larger scope of how political frameworks exist, it can't just be who solves the problem and just like that, assuming even AI is as accurate as they say. I think the political scope involves things like accountability and legitimate representation of the people, especially because we are talking about developed democracies. It can't just be, hey, bring AI because they can solve everything. I think OG is out. A few things you need to understand about developed democracies. First, these are mature democracies that are at least trying or are able to sustain internal and external pressures. Secondly, their economic stability as a country, as a state, whichever, is literally from its own democratic framework, whether that be the people that you have elected, the people that you actually trust to do certain things, or people can actually hold you accountable by you're given the power to the people, like that drives the economy. Thirdly, there's a high value for human rights in this country generally. I think most of them want to, push for people to feel included and all all that. And then fourthly, as they say, is a high institutional oversight. This is important because at the stage where Kenya decides to have this Diella, it's probably not going to get the same ranks as Albania. We think it's mostly not just only because of AI, because of the counter framework that you're getting here that is strongly dependable. Look, AI is not something that just comes and solves everything. First and foremost, it's not neutral or independent body. It's fully dependent on previous programs, previous political frameworks. Notice how I say previous and not future. Governance is again looking at your people, how things are evolving, how you can cater for people in the future. Secondly, it's a development of the past. Thirdly, predictability is always going to be based on the patterns that have happened in the past and not based on the current situation. And then a lot of the times, it's not that the AI was structured specifically for Albania or for the US. It's going to be imported from a multitude of systems, and then now the personalization is dependent on whatever metric that we cannot even hold accountable. That's very important because then the resulting impact of what AI looks like is fast. And no predictability on what you will actually expect, especially as people, because again, of the structure of how it works. Second, very little relationship with people, it's AI. Thirdly, there's little linkage with democracy as a whole. No accountability. That means you're not answerable to the parliament or AI. You cannot ask questions, but also if anything goes wrong, who are we asking? There's no subject political linkage. I'll tell you why being in the political space is important. That means when Wangara is telling you how self-interest is all bad and all that, we'll tell you why the political dynamics are important for governance to run fast. We don't think Diella was brought in as a solution to problems, all problems of developed democracies. We think in experimentation of AI, especially given how developed democracies work. Or secondly, you're helping humans the less tasking jobs. It wasn't brought in as, hey, we need to grant AI powers, like there was no legitimate to grant it powers, voting powers. We think that's an aftermath that they need to justify. We don't get that. That means you do not legitimize giving them any legislative authority. That means being able to represent people is not justified. Being able to oppose authority, that means, how legislative places work, that's not justified. Giving AI any coercive power during voting and all that, not justified. That is not how that can justify giving. A few things here, especially in the context of developed democracies. First, the counter side is that the humans are operating as they were, with AI as consultative rules. That means you either have low marginal benefit for what was already existing, because again, developed democracies, this is what has brought them there. But secondly, you're introducing something that completely counters the structures that have been working for them, especially because the introduction was in the name of, again, we just want less tasking jobs to be counted. You need to justify why the program, how politics will work is completely different now, because you're working with patterns of, as I've told you, previous records and not people. I think that's a problem. Let me give the distinction of how it operates now and AI included. First, legitimacy is essentially gotten from electoral consent, because electoral consent by the people is the thing that builds accountability. AI does not have that. Diella was appointed, the AI offsprings are now basing off of that. There's zero connection to the people. Regardless of self-interest or what she tells you cognitive bias, I think this is important just in response to that. First, if you're trying to achieve long-term sustenance, it's not just about making neutral decisions or utilitarian decisions. It's fast. Democracy is not delegitimized. It's important in the long term that people can still hold the guys that are in position accountable. You can still vote for whoever is representing you. I think that's long-term sustenance. Secondly, representation still exists. I've told you. Representation still exists to the point that people can see their leaders in them. You can feel some sort of relation. I think that helps just with the nuances of how politics exists. Again, too ideal. The other thing is that when policies shift with people and culture, and that needs to be engaged with in politics. It shouldn't just be on a retrospective basis. I think that's how you achieve long-term sustenance. Second thing, just in response to Gab, this is not about who solves everything. I think it's important to acknowledge the bits of the interests that are important. I think opposition is the one that really highlights why we're talking about developed democracies. And even what's democracies and not just developed nations. But look at the other thing. We are trying to grant Diella's offspring. remember my mechanization of how AI looks like. That means on their wall, it is completely assumptive that their offspring will operate exactly as Diella will. Even if they tell you the architecture is the same, a few things here. The things that are carried forward are the same human errors which you don't justify. I mean, the same algorithmic errors that we don't get how that has been accommodated for in the space in which we're using Diella, but also the same patterns that are not justified to be accommodative of people. That is what you carry forward. We think it's not justified. I didn't take up your but nobody asked up your why. What then is OO watching for? I've already said, first, accountability is important. Second, legitimate representation of your people. And thirdly, a political space that shifts with people. I think it's important either you maintain status quo or the point that you include AI, it maintains this conservative role. Unless government can prove two things. First, that AI is going to do something that humans are not already doing, or can do that better than humans. Or secondly, that it's safe and does not harm democracy, which again I prove to you that it doesn't. I think it's important that we maintain core as this. Thanks.
Look at the leader of opposition for that speech. Can we request the deputy leader of opposition? Deputy Prime Minister, sorry.
I'm going to prioritize closing for the sake of engagement. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The biggest problem with this, guys, is that there's no accountability. I think that's very weird because it's a policy being passed by a government. So if the AI system does bad thing, it's probably the government is going to be held accountable. So if things go wrong, we're probably going to make this government at all, they'll probably reduce this thing. I don't think accountability is a very deep conversation. The second thing they talk about is the idea of legitimacy. So the Diella is an experimental tool, it has no legitimacy. 2 reasons why, like what Wangari tells you. First, it's proven track record of efficiency. Things like being able to maximize efficiency by over 30% and mitigate corruption over 30%. Why do you think this is something that warrants them legitimacy? Because they've been able to overcome a huge hurdles that physical politicians have not been able to overcome over a long period of time. The reason why you have policy deadlock in most governments is because these politicians vote against on their party lines, which are corrupt in nature, which makes them less efficient towards what people want. And secondly, they say legitimacy is gotten from things like the ability of people to consent. I think the very fact that we are debating the democracies means we debate in a context where people voted for the government. By voting, what you do is that you trade off, you consent trading off your ability to make certain decisions to this particular state. So that means there is direct consent. We beat their argument on legitimacy. Response to CEO before I go into my extension. They say there's probable convolution of these AI systems. They're likely going to be corrupted. Why do we think this is unlikely? The policy that Wangari tells you. Wangari tells you why there's likely going to be a lot of investment into these AI systems. Why is this the case? The populist the political incentives of these particular leaders, they don't want this policy to go wrong because they know if they implement this policy, especially in developed democracies, this is what their image is going to be like. That's going to determine whether or not they're going to be re-elected. Think of the best intuition from things like Obamacare. So that's why they have an incentive to put in effort towards the regulations, and that's why it's likely going to be done well. So that's why we think the ability to corrupt the system is significantly limited by that policy. That's out. First extension then on why we have better and more consistent service delivery for citizenry. I think on this extension, Wongari is able to analyze why we're able to overcome the bureaucratic red tape, which is caused due to the increased polarization of these most developed states. The problem I'm going to analyze is why we also overcome the human inadeptness in most instances when it comes to policy making. Note, the ability of human beings to rationalize and analyze information is significantly limited. Why is this the case? Because human beings just have slower brain power and finite brain power fundamentally. That means when it comes to policy making, the ability to spot things like loopholes and pass and amend good policies is significantly limited. And this is especially very important for developed economies because efficiency is very crucial. How fast you're able to come up with policies and deal with the problems and spot problems within your policy making is very important because it determines how fast you have service delivery for your people. In our comparative, the delta becomes AI has an increased capacity to increase its information access. That looks like two things. First, its ability to access, epistemic access, is limitless. Just AI can divulge a lot of information. But then secondly, its capacity to analyze and come up with conclusions is very efficient. That happens very fast. The importance of this to this debate is that it shows why these AI systems are more likely to spot oversight faster. That means when it comes to amendments, you take less time to amend policies. On their comparative, you have to take weeks and weeks to spot problems of the previous policies so that you can be able to amend them fundamentally. That means for the people who are waiting for these policies to be passed, they have slower service delivery. On our side, you do this faster. But then secondly, this also becomes more cost efficient because you don't have to spend a lot of money paying different people or spending a lot of hours just doing this research because this is just fast. It's AI, it's likely going to do these things faster. This just shows you why we increase the capacity to have better service delivery for people. The second extension is going to have why we have why the comparative in their side has worse policy outcomes. Not the frame that Wangari gives you. Why we exist in a bipartisan society. And currently there has been a shift towards right in most of these developed countries that looks like France and the United States. This becomes very problematic for these societies because it means it hinders the ability of survival in these pluralistic societies because it means the policies in their comparative are likely going to shift towards one direction, harming another group of people. This becomes bad. Look at things like healthcare. The reason that led to the shutdown of the government in the United States was because of these two bipartisan opposing parties being unable to agree on the healthcare bill. That means for the people who depend on these healthcare bills, they'll not be able to get their policies passed, not because these bills are not good, but because these politicians have incentives. They have incentives to cater to the people who lobby for them, people who get them to government. We are uniquely able to overcome these particular things because the rationalization of this AI is not incentivized on selfish needs of re-election. It's incentivized on maximizing efficiency and the optimality of the policy outcomes. That's why we have better service delivery. In their side, especially with the trend that they don't challenge on how most of these developed states are bipartisan in nature and this trend is going on, it's more likely that the impacts we tell you are likely going to happen. This is problematic because for most of these developed economies, for you to get the disbursement of funds from the central bank to be able to enact policies, you need to agree on these policy actions. So that means you slow down this development for people in their side. That looks like for the minorities who require healthcare, procedures, for the people who require education to be able to progress themselves, you slow down those things. For the people who require investment in the criminal justice system, for the cases they matter, they care about to be listened to, you slow down those deliveries on their side. We uniquely save this because we show you where you're more likely efficient before I move on. Opening.
Cool. How are you putting up the AI to be in parliament? Are you voting them in?
No, this is not a political debate. That is why the conversation on, and this was my next thing, the conversation on legislative authority is very important. This requires three things: the ability to propose, amend, and develop policies that are non-law based. So these are policies around healthcare, education, and all those things. They would create the constitution in our comparative. They would do those heinous things within these debates. There are three metrics then we established from opening government that you ought to use. Firstly, which comparative bolsters the government efficiency, which We tell you this on a couple of levels. Firstly, when we overcome the bureaucratic red tape, this is the best case scenario where they're not bipartisan, that still has worse outcomes on their side. But then secondly, when we overcome the humanistic inadeptness in our comparative and why that just means better solvency for people. The second thing you need to weigh is on the policy innovativeness. So the ability of these societies to come up with policies that best serve their people. And I've already explained to you why this level of efficiency is very crucial for these communities because of the role they play in the world, because of how they're like pace setters. So like even developing countries depend on these states' ability to maximize their efficiency in innovativeness. But then thirdly, the capacity to mitigate policy related oversight. We'll show you why we do this fundamentally. That is utility for the state, for the people within the state, and more legitimacy for these democracies because they become more functional for all those reasons proud to propose.
Yes,
Thank you, Speaker, for the speech. Let's get the final speaker from open behalf of Deputy Leader of Opposition.
I'll start now. Sorry. My time has up. Yeah. Bubble.
Can they manage them?
Yeah.
Making noise.
Manage them. No, but it's okay. Don't worry. They won't be fine. Anyway, I'll start now. Panel, you can't say you have a developed democracy and still have the need to develop policies as fast as possible because apparently there's urgency to their case. The only reason they want AI there is because they are faster in developing policies. Apparently a catastrophe has hit and nobody could have imagined this happening, and that's why you need AI there. The problem is they don't give you reasons for any of this happening. At best, it comes from Prime Minister, which was, hey, there was gridlock in the USA a couple of weeks ago. We'll tell you why it was bad then, but every single other thing that they done, I'll actually engage all of it, is politicians lobby for so many things. Crazy enough, well and good, politicians lobbying is not a bad thing. That's the whole point of, they lobby but people still vote them in. That is legitimate power in any democracy, and that's why you'd have, and again, why the second reason why it's not even the worst thing possible, Andrew Cuomo used close to 60% of the money that Donald Trump used to traverse the entire USA and was still not voted in. Apparently lobbying is really bad. People are still choosing what they want, and representation is what matters here. That is what is the best thing that will serve you. Second is, hey, humans are slow mindfully. At best, you're speaking for yourself. Second is, hey, we do not really care for how fast people are, because if you're making decisions based on how fast you can respond to something, then you're using AI for that. At best, it's using information from the past, and that's why, at best, CAP has put that in the info slide. 2 years to gather information on how Parliament works, not how people work, not to respond to anything that people have sent them there to do. That means that the only information you're using is the past to cater for catastrophes at best, if that's the case that then exists. The third thing, I'm sorry, I'm just going to engage you entirely. When things go wrong, you would hold it accountable. The problem is, you cannot say it's a policy motion where you're introducing something without telling us how best you're holding it accountable. If we are introducing it randomly, how are we getting it out? If it's not useful, because they are claiming that there's so much useful, when we don't need to solve an urgent problem, do we still have it in-house? If it is being controlled by a particular side of the house, what does that then look like for the issues that they didn't raise? The last thing is what existed in OG. They talk about people are blocking bills because they just come from the other side. Listen, the problem with bills being introduced in Parliament is they still need support. You need support from both sides. That means that you're still not fixing the problem, which is both sides still hate each other. If one side is supporting it, if a bill is about immigration, Republicans will still hate it. If it's about, hey, giving more people room to, or actually women to have more choice, it doesn't matter. Those people are still not solving for it. They are split on issues. They're not just split on hating each other the entire time. And even if that's the case, then you're still screwed. If AI is making a policy that one side agrees on, you're not fixing any problem in status quo. I hope you understand this. I've tried to make sense as to what your argument does not look like. Here is the best cases that you make in this house. Reasons for is why you have a policy motion, and that's what opposition is arguing for. Accountability is what my partner tells you. At the point in which you are saying that you're supposed to be answerable, the only way you get legitimate power is if you have people giving you that power. They reserve their power and give it to a government, give that power of state machinery to a government, and they give their own resources to a government. At the point in which one person is supposed to represent every 200,000 in any house of parliament, or in the Senate, it's one person for every 600,000. You introduce one person or an entity, AI, to represent not any of the 600,000, but they have the same equal power to that many people, then what are they accountable to? If you're holding it accountable, what are you holding it accountable accountable as, at the point in which you do not claim or mechanize how that is possible, then you can't say that you're holding it accountable. The second aspect of accountability is you, technically, crazy enough, are still subject to the powers and the laws that you pass. If AI is passing a law, is voting on a law, is proposing a law, how is it subject to any of those laws if it does not exist outside the confines of the parliament? If you're passing anything, it's not even about for the constitution. Budgets are an unconstitutional thing. If it's about medication, you do not have any need for medication. If it's about agriculture, you're not existing there. It's still an unconstitutional thing that so many people need to exist within it and are going to be affected by it. And that's why you are voted in by people and then they're responsible for it. And that's why we as Kenyans screwed up, voted in Ruto. We're going to be okay with that till 2027. You'll riot, you'll do whatever, but majority of the people did that. We are being held accountable to the things that we then did. We fucked up, we'll be screwed over till 2027. AI is fucking up, what the hell are we doing then? If it is making decisions, what is informing it? Apparently, you are now unbiased. They've not said that developing, because they've said that developing countries are these countries that have a mature democracy. If you're agreeing with that, then how screwed up are the laws that are coming from there? If it's just about people being divided, they are voting for the things that they agree on. The problem that they're supposed to describe in a policy motion does not exist. If CG has any way to save their case, I'll be taking your view right now. Cool. Let's go into representation. This is about consensual designation of power and the ability to allocate resources if it comes to things that are just numbers. You have a POI?
The reason why human sapiens can't work is that we've explained why the AI has deficiencies in analyzing the past and having effective policies.
Cool. It's okay. AI is efficient, nobody refuses that. My partner tells you then, what's the problem with having it as an advisory tool? What's the problem with having it as a consultative tool? Because at the point in which it's introducing a bill, and crazy enough, we just talk about efficiency and why that exists on our side of the house. Efficiency involves discussing bills with other people on the other side of the house. The only problem with an AI proposed bill is that you have to prompt it. Because it's AI, we've not told it's AGI, it does not speak for itself, you now have to prompt it. That means it relies on every other person in the house, in the parliament, being curious about what this bill is. At the point in which you are saying they still have other resources, they still have other problems to answer to when it comes to their own people, then the only people who will ever care to support a bill that is then proposed by it, just because it's apparently a national thing, is the people who care, are curious enough. If you're resting on something as random as curiosity from people who were describing lawmakers being people who are so busy and have so much in their place, then you can't claim that you have any efficiency or bipartisanship to solve any problems that you then have. Second, like I was saying, representation, it's about taking over, right? Hey, representation involves, like I said, 1 to 600,000 people, 1 to 200,000 people. It's exposure to information, it's exposure to how these things, the laws that you're passing, exist out there. If you do not have that, you're making decisions out of a blur. If you do have that, it's second-hand reporting at best, and that's what the motion has characterized. The only thing you do then know is the 2 years you've been in parliament and what has been said in parliament. That's a second-hand reporting because you've already said it's bipartisan. That means everyone reporting anything in parliament is already reporting it from a broken lens or a different colored shaded whatever. There's no way you're then efficient in representing your own people. Secondly, they are claiming a very dumb thing. Just because the info slide says 30% of legislative whatever improves or 40% of reduction in corruption, you cannot account that to just AI. The clarity that I ask her is at the point in which you do not say that is the only thing because you're claiming it's a mature democracy. That means from her own framing, you have systems that are put in place in every single mature democracy. That means corruption is going to die down almost every single year. You can't say that just comes because of AI during this debate.
Deputy and invite the member of government to open the case for CG.
Focus on your eyesight.
I have money, I can fix it.
So, yeah, grateful to Renson. I'm grateful to Renson. I think I've had a really good time with you, so that's really nice. Even if everyone has been bullying you, I think you're doing a good job. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The problem with opening opposition's case on accountability is they are running a negative case. They aren't comparing accountability on our side vis-a-vis accountability that exists in their side of the world. Because note, accountability in their side of the world is going to take time. You need to wait for five years to vote your horrible president out of office. That means they are still constantly making bad tax decisions. They are constantly increasing the tariffs your country is facing, so you aren't able to get goods from Canada because goods are becoming more expensive. You're protesting on the streets because of the BLM movement. He doesn't care. You're constantly getting shot or held in jail for no reason. The significance of time is not something that we can downplay. The second thing to note is that accountability is not something they can have existing in their side of the world, because they paint these democracies as democracies that function perfectly, but we've seen what happened in the US. Because Elon Musk supported Trump, Elon Musk was literally part of the US government and part of making decisions. The problem with that is this proves how these democracies function. Whoever pays the most, like the highest bidder, gets the ability to make decisions, and that's problematic. So even if they say you'll be able to consult these systems, there's nothing that consultation is going to do, because at the end of the day, you are beholden to whoever paid you to get into that position of office. Democracy doesn't exist on their side of the world because a lot of these governments are literally held ransom by private entities. That's something that's harmful. If legitimacy is truly the most important thing in the debate, it's not something that they can argue. They need to debate in reality. These worlds are not perfect. The first extension is engage in what they're saying. What if things go wrong? Because I think it's fair to assume on both sides of the world, things can probably go wrong. Like, let's say this autonomous system isn't the best. It was fed bad information. It's biased. In their side of the world, you have leaders that are held by the private entities. You have leaders that are populist, so you voted in a popular Trump that doesn't know anything about economics, that doesn't know how to engage with the Ukrainian president, stuff like that. So things will probably go bad on either side of the world. I'm willing to accept that. The debate then becomes who is able to rectify that, which is something that's an important discussion to have. In their side of the world, you need to wait immense amounts of time in order to vote someone else into power. You need to spend immense amounts of money campaigning, advertising, trying to buy into this populist rhetoric to make the people believe I'm popular enough for you to have me in power. That's time, that's money. And that further extends analytically on their argumentation on efficiency. In the comparative, in our side of the world, it's far much easier to simply shut off an autonomous system than it is to wait to vote your horrible leader out of power. But even if they say themselves that human beings will be probably coding the algorithm into this autonomous system, it's easy for you to tell what you told the system. Like, what data did I feed the system that has made it make a bad decision? What question did I ask it that brought a bad result? We've seen that even with ChatGPT today, we are learning how to generate prompts better in order to better engage with these systems. It's easier to do that in our side of the world than it is to change the positions that Trump has or change what Trump believes about blacks and immigrants. It's harder to do that in their side of the world. It's far much easier in our side of the world to just improve the algorithm to feed it better information. I think that's an important thing to note. So it engages a lot of what they say on the fact that these autonomous systems are going to be making decisions based on past information. It's very easy to frequently keep updating these systems. It's very easy for you to give these systems information in order to that's more engage with the world as it is today. The second thing then is on the idea of democracy. So I agree that our opening talks about populism, but they don't talk about how populism engages with their case on legitimacy, because that's important. They say that we need to allow people to make their own decisions, because when people make their own decisions, they are democratic, and that gives the decisions they make some legitimacy. I think it's fair for our opening to say this thing is popular, we brought it into our legislation for some reason. But our important contribution here is to prove that populism isn't fact affecting democracy. So it's not true that democracy exists perfectly in their side of the world. Populism is literally coercing you to make decisions. Like you see this person constantly being campaigned and like thrown at your face. You see this particular political leader like trying to become popular, trying to engage with you a lot more. It's literally coercing you to make a particular decision. So it's true that democracy and the decisions that people are making in a lot of these societies are already decisions that are like forced upon you by the private entities that pour money into these people, allowing them to campaign more and to be in your face a lot more. So democracy is at risk. The only way we can correct that in our side of the world is by ensuring that these algorithms, at least because they are fed by information on this existing country. This is not like ChatGPT that is drawing information from the general world. When you develop this autonomous system, you're developing it for your country. So it fed information on your people, it fed data on your people, it has a lot of like know-how on the context of those developed countries. So obviously it's going to be making decisions that are in connection to you because it's making decisions based off of information that's like, revolving around you, at least better than the comparative where they'll be making decisions according to whoever paid them to get into office. Yeah, closing. I can take it, yeah.
Cool. You still have Donald Trump. You just have, at best, someone in the Senate suggesting policies. That means, what's the incentive for any side to pick him?
At least in our side of the world, the people who make decisions are the people that sit within this like legislature. They aren't beholden to the fact that Trump paid them to get into office. They aren't beholden to the fact that Elon Musk was paid by Trump, so they owe Trump something. These are systems that are making decisions based off of efficiency. Because Trump can't act unilaterally. It's why Trump all the time tries to buy into Congress, tries to make sure Congress is on his side. In our side of the world, at least now you have to make sure you're proposing something that's efficient, something that's workable, as opposed to proposing something that I will like buy into because I care about Trump, because I care about Elon Musk. That's something that's extremely important. But I also talked about how corruption is an important factor to consider in the info slide. Because fine, I agree that we don't probably have corruption as it exists in the developed world within developing countries, but corruption here is different. Corruption means striking deals with these private entities because they got you into power. It means allowing like certain companies to continuously exist as monopolies because they're the people that funded your campaign. This is what corruption looks like. And that's why the info slide is able to talk about an improvement, I don't know, 40 or 30% in corruption, because they're the sorts of things that are no longer being catered for. The last thing is in terms of cost. I think this is just cost efficient, obviously. You're not paying salaries, you're not spending immense amounts of money as a member of like Congress trying to like rally people to get you into office. Like it's a system that's set up to make good decisions. So you aren't spending money paying salaries, you aren't spending money having people campaign. That means more money to make the economy better, more money to pay the poor people, and that's obviously something.
We thank the member of government for her speech and invite the first speech from CEO, member of POP.
Short of the equity derivation that the government have now. Do you know how lucky runs and consistency gets in order to them? I think when we're talking with children, if they don't take you for clarity, all of the markings on either of the speeches come from that I am not trying to assign here. That's that. 3, 2, 1. We think it's quite unfortunate that there's something that exists in the room that if we cannot control 40% level of corruption or 30% level of efficient governance, I do not have the same level of control over how your decision making will look like. Considering majority of the times that decision making or policies or all of these things of lobbying look like, this is in spaces where the person who has the biggest level of capital does the same thing. How does this align with what AI does within society? AI is already shaped with people who have that level of capital. They just don't have that level of capital. They can enforce it within the people who hire to shape the biases we see in all these things. 5 things that you get from us. 1, AI in itself is already flawed when it comes to decision-making capital. It only exists for the select few, or the select few who have enough capital to shape what narratives or what lobbying power look within community. Secondly, AI in itself has that assumption that it's smarter than majority of the humans, and this is most likely way worse, considering the majority of the people don't have that level of understanding, or that level of concept, or that level of exposure when it comes to decision-making calculus. It is way dangerous when that happens, considering it's not that smart, it's constantly that harmful. But beyond that, AI biases are not shaped by specific model. AI biases are shaped by heavy investment in capital and how that can be used to shape narratives and beyond that. But beyond that, efficiency of policies are not shaped by the select few, considering majority of the times you have policies that exist within status quo, majority of the times you have policies that exist within governance. The biggest people who accrue benefits are still the elitist few, or even not the elitist few who have access to the elitist few. But lastly, the thing efficiency is shaped by the idea that you're most likely more proximate to the person who's making this decision. Whether it's taking long term or short term, you're most likely willing to deal with Kiragu, Kimani, or you're most likely willing to deal with those people. Why is this important? 5 arguments that you get from C. You see? 5 arguments from C. 1, signaling effect. Most likely, if it exists within spaces where corruption or etc. becomes the biggest level of conversation, you're wired to accept any forms of reality that exist within the same space. Corruption has been the biggest thing when it comes to bureaucratic harms or coercive power within states. If you have that level of acceptance when it comes to reduction, you end up within the same scenario. You're most likely being coerced within the same ways, you just do not see that level of harm. You're most likely accepting it because the framing around it look like 90% free fat instead of 10% fat. That looks like humanity at best. We think it's important for that level of engagement to be spotted. That signaling effect on how it's expressed within community is why people buy into certain people. That's why they don't vote for certain people. That level of representation when it comes to decision-making calculus is heavily important. When AI is shaping this, it understands this level of cognitive biases when you're interacting with people who are most likely voters. If not voters, interacting with people who do not have the understanding or the capacity to shape decision-making calculus within society. It most likely puts them in way worse positions that do not accrue benefits in themselves. They're willing to sacrifice their own existence to just accrue benefits because it looks nice, it sounds nice, it looks pretty, it sounds like Mozilla at best. Secondly, we think when you're dealing with developing democracies, AI controls majority of these people. Majority of the times you're dealing with developing democracies, it looks like a simple thing. Developing democracies have levels of access within the wealthy people who always control the systems. Then you need capitalistic systems where you're fucked up regardless, and your signaling effect is, I want to be rich as Elon Musk, I want to be rich as Kimani or Renson at best. You're wired to accept that wealth is the biggest conversation within these spaces. The biggest harm that comes with wealth is wealth is not accrued by your own sacrifices, etc. It's accrued by you accruing benefit at the worst end of someone else. This will look like therefore at best when you're dealing with CG. But beyond that, when you're dealing with the legislature, when it comes to representation, sometimes the biggest difference you accrue and the biggest levels of protection is check mechanisms. As the majority of the people are willing to align with AI, willing to align with wealth, it doesn't check for majority of the people within communities that don't have that wealth, they don't have that level of access, they don't have that level of decision-making calculus. It puts them in a way worse decision-making calculus, it puts them in a way worse experience, and that's most likely not justified. Fourthly, when it comes to decision-making, and AI is making independent decisions, means two things. The biases that already exist when you're dealing with the AI will still exist regardless. It's in the info slide before you ask me what you are. So three things here. One, when it comes to representation, they're representing the same biases that have wired them. Most likely the wealthy people who shape AI, the wealthy people who exist in this bracket are what who shape the representation looks like. If you're willing to buy into this just because corruption has slowed down, corruption that accrued benefits for the wealth of this majority of the people shaping the AI, you most likely putting yourself in a more disadvantageous position and you're not willing to buy into it. But secondly, the consequences around decision making when AI is doing this is you cannot hold them accountable. In fact, Adika tells you it's way faster, you cannot do shit about it. When Ruto is passing bills when Raila is dying at the same time, you're most likely emotionally conflicted. What are you prioritizing at that point? When the state has that level of capacity to pass this bill because of the level of lobbying power, economic power, etc., it's most likely you're going to end up in way worse position, and I'll take you in a few, just don't worry. Lastly here, it's inclusivity. I think majority of the time, you're dealing with AI, it includes the biases of the richest people within community. Beyond the inclusion of the richest people within community, the assumption here is minorities will be included, minorities will have this conversation. We think that's most likely fucked up, considering they do not shape the AI, they don't invest in these spaces, they don't have that level of access. In fact, it's never a priority of them for this to work. The only time they accrue benefits within propaganda and how that's shaped to then engagement. This looks like you're dealing with corruption. Of all things in the entire world, that we know corruption, even if it's 40%, can still accrue benefits within community. That's the one thing they deal with it. The reason this is dealt with is because of how it's shaped within community. If you think that you can shape corruption and get a better life as a poor person, you most likely buy into anything. This level of coercive power, because of the harms that are shaped within community, would mean you end up in the worst place. But beyond that, I've taken you, sorry. Three things here. One, you influence the same level of coercion, and it doesn't change across board. The worst bit is you rationalize it within community. You make the victims rationalize it within community. You make the victims accept it within community. You make the victims appreciate it within community. This level of gaslighting and manipulation is something that CG or CO is not willing to defend. But two things here. The compounding effect due to intersectionality, this will look like how laws are made and how policies are made, would mean governance ends up to fuck majority of the people existing in these spaces. But beyond that, if you're meant to tap to access on how change can be made within communities, you don't get to agree to the same thing.
We thank the member of opposition for opening Cyril's case, and for the final speaker from CG, Ransom.
But then my name is Ransom. What the chair said, so. But I pardon you.
Maybe you are welcome to your city.
Thanks, and how do we take it?
It is not a conversation. So first of all, shout out to my partner. She is one of the best partners that I offer in. And also shout out to my team, Charlie Rose over there, SDS, and every other person who is here. And the last shout out, no feelings attached, goes to Mary. She has been praying for me all the time. Yeah. So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. And I notice what Ndolo tells you is that we do not have accountability on their side. But we tell you that I think Michelle already comes here and she analyzes to you how this AI system looks like. On their side, it looks like at the point in time, like we have this particular mess or something has gone wrong within the government in terms of policy making. For them, they have to wait like for the 4 years or until the term of this policy maker comes to an end. That is when they can do something about it. But on our side, we tell you that it is easier because you can hold these like AI systems accountable, like the creators of these AI systems. But another thing another characteristic of these AI systems is that it is not a static thing. What this one means is that it has this capacity of learning from its failures and being able to adjust and improve on it as the time goes by. And that is a very important thing that we must notice. So this one basically takes away like that sort of like lack of accountability that these people talk about. In the event, a particular policy has been passed and it is like infringing on people's rights. So we can hold them accountable in the sense that we can hold like the AI, we can shut down the AI system, we can hold those creators of the AI system accountable so that they can come up with a better like AI system by fixing the algorithms, and that is why it is better on our side. Basically, like for the entire opposition bench, like they don't have any accountability mechanisms that override or overpower like the government side, and even the benefits are better. But lastly, the other thing is like Ndolo comes here and he concedes that most of these like the private entities are the ones that are going to control that are the ones that are going to control this. That is the concession that we agree onto. But the worst case scenario is like in their side at the point in time, like I vie for a particular seat, you endorse me, like you inject a lot of capital in order for me to win this particular position. So you have that burden of providing me with tenders, providing me like with positions within your government so that I can be able like to benefit from this one. What this one happens is like it escalates the rate at which corruption happens, whereby there is a lot of nepotism within your system, and that is how it happens. But on our side, we tell you that the AI systems have the neutral capacity. What this one means is that at the point in time the government has already invested money like through research and growth so that they can develop the systems to perfect the mistakes that they happen. So it is easier for you because it is going now to cater like for a vast majority of the people, regardless of your religion, regardless of your gender, regardless of your political affiliation, hence making it better on our side. But on their side, it is not guaranteed. So at the point in time, I'm a Democrat, you voted me into office, of course I'm going to give you an upper hand. The other Republicans are going to be left out, and we just feel like that one is already frayed, and that particular defense cannot stand in this particular debate. But panel, why do we feel like this? Okay, the last thing I think on the chart of the rich people, I think he comes and says that this AI system is going to be managed by the rich people. These are the people who have the money and power, etc. Panel, we feel that this is a symmetrical thing because most of these politicians, they are the rich, they are the ones who are being elected into office time and again. So the same, I think that at the point in time you elect these rich people like to be in office, they are still going to pass these policies that are going to work for the best interest of themselves. That is the thing that they must concede to, and Ndolo already concedes to it. So the problem with that is, at the point in time they are passing these policies on their side, it takes time in order for you to take away these policies. It takes time until this person comes out of office, like the tenure in office comes to an end. That is when you can hold them accountable, maybe through the voting system, etc. But on our side, at the point in time, like our problem has already emerged, it is easier for you to shut down the system. It is easier for you to hold accountable the person who created the system, so that that form of efficiency is well achieved on our side, because like the immediate, especially like the fears, like the urgent needs, such as the catastrophes, like the earthquakes, like the COVID-19, at the point in time, these things that need like the immediate response to them, we're not going to wait for the 4 years. We're not going to wait like for the end of like the end of their tenure in office in order for us to fix. What AI does, like it is so efficient in the sense that when it comes to decision making, it is easier for it, like it takes less time, but secondly, it takes little amount of money, because most of these, like the people, like the parliamentary, most of the time, like they have the parliamentary sittings, like right away from the first reading to the fifth reading. This one takes even more than a week, but these people are still being paid like while they're in office, so it is costing like the government a vast amount of money. So we just feel like on their side, still that one makes their case so frayed. And yeah, and the last thing I think when we talk about, the last thing I think that is straight on their case that makes like the entire opposition team not to go anywhere after this debate is on the idea of populism. The nature of this like developed like democracies, how they look like. They are populistic in nature. What this one means is that they tend to vote in those leaders not based on their competence, but based on their they tend to vote in like technocrats, like those people who are able like to appeal to their interests, the policies or their manifestos that really matter for the best interest of the people. But on our side, it is easier because these AI systems, they are neutral in nature. They don't care whether you voted for them, whether you didn't vote for them, and that one makes it easier for them now to maneuver, for them now to serve the best interests of the people, and that is why the entire bench, Zephyr is not going to run anything that is, unless she comes with a new matter, and that one should be penalized for that one panel. But why do we, okay, the bottom line of this is, like, why is our side better? One, like in the event, the autonomous system shuts down, in the event there is an error, we shut down the system, we hold these persons accountable, so it is easier for them, like, to improve on the system. And secondly, like, we have the research that is constantly identifying the problems that exist with these systems, hence making it better. And the third thing is like just based on the neutrality of the system, like no biasness as it is as it happens on their side, matters who voted for me, who didn't vote for me. Then on the issue of like efficiency and everything, and the better like cost,
Okay, we thank the government group and invite the final speaker of the House, the Chief Whip. Your minute stops out.
Yeah. Alright, I'm going to, firstly, my shout out is to Ndolo. His partnership has taken my brain on road. After this, I'll be judging for a very long time. Very long time. Let me put my whip skills to some serious use. I'm going to be prioritizing opening because actually I might end up prioritizing closing because the vast majority of my engagement is opening because I cannot. Okay, let me start. 3, 2, 1. I think there are 6 lies that Michelle says. 1, actually, we're going to take them as truths. 1, AI is inherently flawed. That's why she concedes that it needs surveillance. That's why she stresses that it's not going to be making legislative decisions and whatnot. She wants to reduce the extent of power. That proves that she doesn't trust them. 2, Ronson admits that AI is smarter than human beings and AI learns from its mistakes. He's hinting on something really important. AI trains itself. ChatGPT 4 was trained by ChatGPT 3. ChatGPT 5 was trained by ChatGPT 4. That means humans have very minimal control over their decisions and the actions that are then taken by AI at that point in time. Therefore, they can't argue to that extent. But 2, it means that we can't check AI systems if they're inherently smarter than us because they're functioning on algorithms and steps that are far exceeding our control. That means we can't control them to that particular extent because we have low brain power. 3, AI is biased. That is to say it's trained on specific models and trained on specific data sets. A human being is vastly going to be combined by different opinions. When they campaign in a democratic country, they're going to learn things from democratic societies and democratic people. We live in the existence of each and every single person. When you're dissociated from them, that means you have the privilege of dissociating from mindsets and only working on what you're trained from. That's why AI could only bullshit from Reddit because that's the only extent it bites. And then the last thing is that you're going to have a high level of a signaling effect. That is to say, in the event that you trust someone with vice presidency, you trust them with presidency. That's how Ruto did it. So all the harms that they claim that AI has are going to be expanded to larger extents of office because we've trusted them with power in the first fucking place. And that fourth thing is the quality of policies. AI companies, AI systems are going to push the policies of their parent companies. We live in a capitalistic society. These AI is going to fall from the sky and be like, hey, I'm a neutral observer to society. AI is expensive. That means you have to have a high extent of donors. You have to have, they want political support. They want good tax policies. They talk about Elon Musk. Elon Musk has shares in some of the largest AI companies in the world. What are you talking about? Of course it's going to have influence there, and that level of elitism is going to work on both sides. So your populism argument is out, it's bullshit. But I think 2, AI monopoly is best on a few companies. So you don't even have to convince a large amount of people. One company still AI is training them. The other company in NVIDIA is making the chips. There's another in Europe. There's not much space to which you have to convince people to give AI a broad, a heavily biased training model data system and to force it to have specific opinions and attach itself to those mindsets. And in 5, they work hard very much on this efficiency claim and whatnot. No, the efficiency in the info slide is when the AI were parliamentary assistants. That is when they were watching people, scrutinizing them. So it's vastly probable that these MPs stopped engaging in corruption because they were actively being watched by AI assistants. You're removing the AI from an assistant role of watching people and making it an independent actor in the system. So no longer is CAP watching over your shoulder to see if you're judging well. CAP is seated in the room on the same level as you, arguing the same things. There's literally no incentive. They don't have access to the same levels of extent. This power is not going to translate when they're in government. And then next thing, hey, and this is what OO says, and this is where we can have a bench win of opposition side. If AI is inherently, if a problem in society are that bipartisan societies, companies in and of themselves can't be partisan to the same extent. But if you're willing to argue, like why is it likely that it's going to enter these bipartisan systems? It's because the United States is partisan. Elon Musk, whatnot, etc. are bipartisan companies. But 2, they can shift the allegiances of this AI. That is to say, when Donald Trump got into power, the Amazon head literally offered Melania Trump her own movie with a budget of about $30 million fucking US dollars. That means these people want to buy in. Why? You don't just own an AI company for making MPs. Your AI company also works with ChatGPT, etc. You want good policies for it, so you're going to kiss the ass of the people in power. And then next thing, if they want to concede that AI is capable of making a Republican buy into their narratives, like literally convincing a fucking Republican to buy into democratic parties, that means it's highly, immensely coercive beyond a normal acceptable threshold of humanity. If you can convince me that I'm a boy overnight, it's not that you're very good at being a neutral observer, it's that you're probably very good at being a fucking convincing effect. What is the harm in this instead? This is a signaling effect that he talks to you about, whereby AI tends to gain a monopoly of like political opinions. They talk about speed. The problem with speed is when people do things quickly, they don't understand them. That's why when a debater tries to debate with people who can't judge and you talk quite quickly, they're like, no, I didn't hear anything you said. Sit down, because they don't have the high level of extent and the level of analysis that you tend to have in those cases. But 2, notice how they talk about how AI is smart. This is going to trickle into society. We're going to believe AI is right. Therefore, when these specific companies push forward their narratives into the systems, we buy them. That's why when ChatGPT tells people lies, they still buy into them. People are literally going to catch without visas because they think that they can lead them and stop to the border. People are getting wrong medical advice from ChatGPT because of the branding and the coercive analysis that said government used into this debate. difficulties and immense impossibilities. We think the harms then outweigh the benefits. Why? They admit the fact that bad things in society can be profitable. Therefore, AI can be used to do bad things in society simply because it generates a profit for these companies at that specific point in time. We'd rather it stays in that scale. I think too, the statistics of the strength are likely to create a high extent of coercive power in certain scope. What do I mean? In the event that people keep pushing the narratives of AI, just as literally OpenAI literally pushes wrong statistics about how correct ChatGPT then tends to be, sit down, pushes wrong analysis about how correct ChatGPT tends to be, people then tend to buy into it and stop questioning this system. I think that next is the capacity to solve text situations, i.e., why is Adika's argument on reducing steps in the democratic process vastly harmful? I think one, AI systems should be tested by the public. We have to hear what it is specifically they are pushing. I don't understand why she's arguing that we should shorten the justice process. Most of these steps made are not steps that exist in a vacuum, and she's smarter than the entirety of government systems in the world. These are necessary steps for public to have complete confusion and complete discussion with them. Otherwise, the AI becomes a sort of appointed king. You're adding intuition to the fact that we aren't supposed to question AI because it tends to be correct, and therefore that there are systems in society can bypass over human beings. But I think next, you're most likely going to be dissociating people from the process. That is, you're removing them from a part of the process of like election systems. Therefore, they're going to be taken out. I think there are two problems. One, if people reject them, they're going to use their heads of AI taking their jobs, system being bad in society, and completely overhaul of the government in and of itself. But I think if they agree with it, they're going to still have them having a high tolerance for things like bureaucracy, things like being ignored, things like being displaced from society, and therefore, these are all going to be exploited by public companies, private companies. Why? If Elon Musk knows, you now trust AI, you now believe it. When it tells you a lie, you buy it. You tell it all the lies it wants to tell to you, to give these narratives and whatnot pushes in modern society.
Thank you, everyone.